Young officers mocked the 55-year-old woman in a faded military jacket. They called her a fraud. They didn't know the jacket belonged to a fallen hero, and a 4-star general was about to recognize its ghost patch. Dawn broke over Fort Braxton with military precision, the early sun spilling across the meticulously kept grounds. For Miranda Reeves, this rigid order was a world she both understood and no longer fully belonged to. At 55, she moved with the straight-backed posture that had been drilled into her decades ago, though a slight, almost imperceptible limp in her right leg served as a private, constant reminder of costs paid in a life she was forbidden to speak about. Her steel-gray hair was pulled back in a practical bun, her expression a neutral mask as she approached the base commissary for her weekly grocery run. She pulled the collar of her faded olive-green military jacket tighter against the morning chill. The jacket was a relic, a ghost from another lifetime. The sleeves were frayed, the fabric worn thin at the elbows. She wore it not out of necessity, but from a habit born of private remembrance. Inside, the commissary buzzed with the morning crowd. Young families, retired veterans, and uniformed personnel on their way to duty. Miranda picked up a red shopping basket and moved with quiet purpose, her focus on the grocery list in her hand. Money was tight. The VA benefits that should have sustained her were perpetually tangled in a bureaucratic web, snarled by questions about a service record that, officially, did not exist. As she paused in the canned goods section, comparing the price of soup cans with careful attention, 2 young lieutenants, their uniforms impeccably pressed and their silver bars gleaming, rounded the corner. Their conversation, loud and careless, cut through her concentration. "Did you see the new equipment allocation?" the taller one asked. "Same shortage as last quarter," his companion replied, then stopped short as he noticed Miranda. His eyes flicked to her worn jacket, and a smirk twitched at the corner of his mouth. "Speaking of shortages," he murmured, just loud enough for his friend to hear. "Looks like that one was pulled from a surplus store." Miranda's shoulders tensed, but she did not look up. She had spent a lifetime learning to ignore provocations. "Must have been her grandfather's," the taller lieutenant said, his voice laced with amusement. "That thing looks like it survived a war." Their initial mockery was quiet, a private joke between them. But as she continued through the aisles, her slight limp more pronounced today, they followed at a distance, their boredom finding a new target. When she reached the customer service counter to verify her on-base address, a quarterly bureaucratic hoop she had to jump through for the VA, the humiliation escalated. "I'm sorry, ma'am," the young clerk said apologetically after examining Miranda's paperwork. "I can't verify your veteran status with these documents. I need a standard DD-214. These are the only documents I'm authorized to carry," Miranda explained, her voice remaining even despite the familiar frustration. "My service records are under a special classification." The lieutenants, now standing in line behind her, overheard the exchange. The taller one let out a short, derisive laugh. "Special classification," he whispered loudly to his friend. "That's a new one." The supervisor was called, a middle-aged woman with an efficient but weary manner. She gave Miranda the same apologetic refusal. As she handed back the folder of documents, the lieutenants grew bolder. "Classic stolen valor," the shorter one said, no longer bothering to lower his voice. The comment was a poisoned dart, aimed with casual cruelty. Several people in line turned to stare, their expressions ranging from pity to suspicion. "Wears a jacket that looks military enough, makes up a story about classified ops so no one can check. Pathetic." Miranda took her folder, her face a stoic mask, but inside, a cold, familiar anger was coiling. She felt the weight of their judgment, the public shame of being branded a liar. She turned to leave, her basket of groceries suddenly feeling impossibly heavy, the weight of their scorn pressing down on her. Walking away from the counter, Miranda was adrift in a sea of judging eyes. The lieutenant's laughter followed her, a sharp, ugly sound that echoed the whispers and doubts she had faced for years from a system that refused to acknowledge her. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot flush that crept up her neck, a tremor in her hands. She felt the familiar ghost of her past rise up, not of combat, but of the cold, sterile briefing rooms where her service was redacted, her sacrifices deemed too secret to be honored. She pushed her cart toward the exit, her limp more pronounced now, each step a testament to the very injuries the bureaucracy refused to validate. As she passed the bakery section, the smell of fresh bread triggered a memory so vivid it made her stop, her hand gripping the cart handle for support. The memory was of another smell, the acrid stench of burning aviation fuel and desert sand. The mission was codenamed Tiran 03, a classified extraction in the Iranian desert, 22 years ago. A diplomatic convoy had been ambushed, and her 6-person Spectre Group team was their only hope. The mission had gone sideways from the start. A sandstorm had grounded their air support. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and running out of time. She could see his face as clearly as if he were standing beside her, Major Daniel Callahan, her unit commander. He was a man forged from grit and quiet courage. As enemy Revolutionary Guard units closed in on their position, Callahan had made the impossible choice. "Reeves, you get the asset to the secondary extraction point," he had ordered, his voice calm amidst the chaos of gunfire. "We'll hold them here." "We go together, sir," she had argued. "That's an order, Captain," he'd said, his eyes meeting hers with a final, resolute look. "They don't get to win. Get our people home." He and 2 other team members had created a suicidal diversion, drawing the enemy's fire while Miranda's element spirited the diplomats away. The last she saw of Major Callahan, he was laying down suppressive fire, his position about to be overrun. The jacket she wore today, the one these boys had just mocked, had been his. It was all that had made it back, given to her by a grim-faced CIA contact weeks later, along with his dog tags. The memory receded, leaving a familiar ache in its wake. Miranda stood in the commissary aisle, her knuckles white on the cart handle. The lieutenant's petty cruelty was nothing compared to the weight of that memory. Their insults could not touch the honor she carried in her heart, the silent tribute she paid every day to the men who had not come home. Her resolve, which had wavered for a moment under the sting of public humiliation, now hardened into something unbreakable. It wasn't about proving anything to them. It was about her promise to Callahan, to live a life worthy of his sacrifice, to carry their story in silence, with dignity. She took a deep, steadying breath, the intelligence officer within her reasserting control over the wounded soldier. She would not give them the satisfaction of a reaction. She would finish her shopping, hold her head high, and endure, just as she had always done. She pushed her cart forward, her focus narrowed to the task at hand. It was in this moment of quiet, steely resolve, as she turned the corner toward the checkout lanes, that she saw him. A 4-star general, flanked by 2 aides, had just entered the commissary. He was focused on a document in his hand, but as he looked up, his gaze swept across the store, the practiced scan of a career officer. His eyes passed over her, then stopped, and then locked onto her jacket with an intensity that made the air crackle. Time stood still. General Marcus Harris was a man who noticed things. A lifetime in command, from platoon leader to the highest echelons of the Pentagon, had trained his eyes to see what others missed, a detail out of place, a subtle shift in posture, a symbol where none should be. As his gaze fell upon the woman in the faded olive green jacket, his mind, a vast repository of military history both official and deeply classified, began to connect dots with lightning speed. It wasn't the jacket itself, it was the ghost of a patch on the left breast. The embroidery was gone, worn away by decades of sun and wear, but the faint outline of the stitching remained. It was a shape he had not seen in over 20 years, a shape that officially did not exist. It was the silhouette of a specter, holding a lightning bolt. Spectre Group. His aides continued walking for 2 steps before they realized their commander had frozen, his body rigid, his attention fixed on the unassuming woman with the grocery basket. They turned, their expressions shifting from professional deference to concern. General Harris felt a jolt, a shock of recognition so profound it was almost a physical blow. He knew that patch. He knew what it meant. Spectre Group was a legend, a whisper in the halls of power, a unit of ghosts sent to do the impossible in places America was never supposed to be. Their operations were the stuff of classified lore, their members' identities erased from official records. To see this insignia, even its ghost, here in a base commissary, on the jacket of a civilian woman, was like seeing a dinosaur walk through the parking lot. His plan formed instantly, born of an instinct forged by decades of leadership. This was not a situation to be delegated or deferred. It was a moment of profound, historical significance that required immediate, personal, and public action. He understood instantly the injustice that must have been done to this woman for her to be here, in this state, wearing that jacket. He knew, with an unshakable certainty, that he had a duty to correct it. He handed the document he was holding to his nearest aide without taking his eyes off Miranda. His voice was low, but it carried the unmistakable weight of command. "Wait for me outside." Then, in full view of the crowded commissary, in front of the two smirking lieutenants who were still watching the bold fraud, 4-star General Marcus Harris, a man who commanded armies, snapped his heels together. His body locked into a perfect position of attention, and he rendered a slow, formal, breathtakingly perfect salute. The entire commissary fell silent. The ambient noise of shopping carts, conversations, and checkout beeps vanished. Every head turned. Every eye was fixed on the unbelievable scene unfolding near the dairy case. A 4-star general was saluting an unknown woman in a worn-out jacket. The two lieutenants froze, their mocking smiles melting from their faces, replaced by looks of utter, slack-jawed disbelief. The customer service supervisor stared, her mouth agape. The cashier, an old master sergeant, slowly stood up straight, a look of dawning comprehension in his eyes. Miranda herself was the most shocked of all. She stood frozen, her grocery basket suddenly heavy in her hands. The salute was not meant for a civilian. It was a gesture reserved for an officer, a sign of profound respect. For a moment, she was thrown back across the years, a captain once more, the weight of command settling on her shoulders. With muscle memory that transcended time, she carefully transferred her grocery bags to her left hand, brought her right hand up, and returned the salute with a precision that was as crisp and perfect as his. The salute held for 3 long, silent seconds, an eternity in the frozen-in-time commissary. General Harris lowered his hand, and Miranda followed suit. The psychological operation had begun, and its first shot had shattered the reality of everyone present. The general took 2 steps forward, his eyes never leaving Miranda's. His voice, when he spoke, was not loud, but it carried in the sudden, absolute quiet. It was a voice accustomed to being obeyed, but it was now laced with a deep, almost reverent respect. "Captain Reeves," he said, using a rank she had not heard addressed to her in 20 years. "Spectre Group. Tyran 03. It was not a question. It was a statement of fact, a string of code words that were a key to a secret, buried world. For the 2 lieutenants who stood nearby, the words were meaningless jargon. But for Miranda, they were everything. They were an acknowledgement of her entire life, of the missions, the sacrifices, the comrades she had lost. They were proof that she was not a ghost. She was remembered. A lifetime of discipline, of keeping her emotions locked down, kept her voice steady. "Yes, sir," she confirmed. The general's gaze flickered for a moment to the 2 lieutenants, who now looked as if they were about to be physically ill. He didn't need to say a word to them. His public acknowledgement of Miranda had already passed judgment. Then his eyes returned to her. "It was your unit that got us out," the general said, his voice now carrying a more personal tone, loud enough for those nearby to hear clearly. He was no longer just speaking to her, he was educating the audience. 3 helicopters down. Hostiles on all sides. We were a diplomatic team, trapped and about to be overrun. Official records list the extraction as an equipment malfunction recovery. But I was there. I know the truth. He took a breath, his eyes seeing a memory, not the commissary aisle. Your team created an extraction corridor that saved 32 American lives. Including my own. A collective gasp went through the small crowd of onlookers who had gathered. The story was becoming more legendary by the second. The woman they had just seen shamed at a customer service desk, the woman these lieutenants had openly mocked, was a hero who had saved a general's life. The lieutenants looked like they wanted the floor to swallow them whole. Their faces, once flushed with arrogant amusement, were now the color of ash. They saw their careers, their reputations, flashing before their eyes. They had not just been disrespectful to an old woman, they had insulted a decorated special operations captain in front of the very four-star general she had rescued. It was a mistake so catastrophic, so total, that there was no recovering from it. The psychological war was over before they even knew they were fighting it. They had brought mockery to a gunfight, and their world had been utterly dismantled by a single salute and a few lines of spoken history. General Harris, a master strategist, knew how to press an advantage. He gestured toward the small cafe area in the corner of the commissary. "Would you join me for coffee, Captain?" he asked. It was an invitation that was also a command, a public elevation of her status that served as the final, crushing blow to her tormentors. The crowd, understanding the significance, parted for them silently, a path of respect opening where there had only been mockery. As they settled at a small table, the general didn't waste time. He looked at Miranda, at the worn jacket, at the slight limp she could no longer hide, at the careful way she counted out cash to pay for her groceries. He saw the whole story in a single, infuriating glance. "Medical appeal, sir," Miranda said, answering his unspoken question. "I've been trying to get the VA to recognize injuries sustained during operations without being able to reference the operations themselves." The catch, 22 of the highest order, the general concluded, his expression hardening. The system he led had not only erased her honor, but it had also denied her the basic care she had earned with her own blood. This, to him, was the ultimate betrayal. He pulled out his secure smartphone and dialed a number with quick, decisive movements. His voice was low, but each word was a missile aimed at the heart of the bureaucracy. "This is General Harris," he began. "I need immediate action on a personnel matter." "Yes, that level of clearance. My authorization code is Sierra 9 Delta 40 Tango." He paused, listening. "I need everything we have on Spectre Group declassified immediately. Specifically, all personnel and medical records relating to Operation Tyrann, 2003. Priority Directive." He listened again, his jaw tight. "I understand the protocols. You will override them. This is a direct order from a 4-star officer correcting a 20-year injustice. Make it happen." He ended the call and placed the phone on the table. The checkmate against the system had been delivered. The gears of a vast, unthinking bureaucracy, which had ground Miranda down for years, had just been reversed by a single, powerful command. As if on cue, the two lieutenants approached their table. Their earlier confidence was gone, replaced by a rigid, terrified formality. They stopped at a respectful distance and came to attention. "Sir," the taller one said, his voice tight. "Request permission to speak." General Harris didn't look at them. He looked at Miranda, a silent question in his eyes, deferring the decision to her. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Granted," the general said. The lieutenant turned to Miranda, his eyes unable to meet hers. "Ma'am. Captain. I wish to apologize for my extremely inappropriate and disrespectful behavior. There is no excuse for how we spoke to you, or about you. We acted shamefully. We failed to uphold the values of the officer corps." His companion mumbled a nearly identical, equally pathetic apology. Miranda studied them for a long moment. "You couldn't have known," she said finally, her voice not forgiving, but factual. "That was the point of units like mine. We operated in shadows so others could work in the light." "That doesn't excuse our behavior, ma'am," the lieutenant insisted. We judged a person by their appearance, and we were profoundly wrong. A lesson worth learning early in your careers, General Harris observed, his tone making it clear that while the apology was noted, the incident would not be forgotten. Return to your duties. As the two chastened officers retreated, the general's gaze fell again on Miranda's jacket. That jacket, he said thoughtfully. It wasn't standard issue for Spectre Group. No, sir, Miranda said softly, running her fingers over the frayed fabric. It belonged to Major Callahan. Our unit commander. He didn't make it back from Tehran. The general nodded, the final piece of the story clicking into place, his respect for her deepening even further. Daniel Callahan, he said quietly. One of the finest officers I ever knew. I was never officially briefed on how he died. He was covering our extraction, sir, Miranda said, her voice steady. He held the perimeter alone so the rest of us could get the diplomatic team to safety. His last order was for us not to come back for him. The general was silent for a moment, absorbing the weight of her words. He looked at the old, worn jacket, no longer seeing a piece of surplus clothing, but a shroud of heroism, a burden of command she had carried alone for 22 years. It was the final, devastating checkmate against the lieutenant's shallow judgment. The jacket they had mocked as retro was, in fact, the last relic of a true American hero. 3 months later, Miranda Reeves walked through the same commissary doors. The routine of the base was unchanged, but her place within it had been irrevocably transformed. Her limp was less pronounced, thanks to the expedited and advanced medical treatments that had finally been approved. The VA, spurred by a direct inquiry from the Joint Chiefs, had miraculously untangled 2 decades of red tape in under a week. She still wore the faded olive-green jacket, but it had been professionally cleaned and preserved. On the left breast, where the ghost patch had been, now sat 2 items. One was a newly issued Presidential Unit Citation, awarded retroactively to the disbanded Spectre Group. The other was a small, understated pin representing the Silver Star, which Major Callahan had been awarded posthumously, a recognition made possible by Miranda's and General Harris's testimony during the declassification review. The change was most palpable in the eyes of others. The whispers and mocking glances were gone, replaced by nods of profound respect. The lieutenants who had tormented her had been formally reprimanded and reassigned to a remote administrative post in Alaska, a career-ending move known colloquially as being sent to the icebox. One of them, before he left, had sent her a handwritten letter of apology, stating that the incident had forced him to reevaluate his entire understanding of service and character. Her new mission had come unexpectedly. General Harris, true to his word, had established a new specialized training program for complex extraction operations at Fort Braxton. He had asked Miranda to be a civilian consultant. Reluctantly at first, she had agreed. She found a new purpose in sharing the hard-won lessons of her past with a new generation of soldiers. She taught them not just tactics, but the ethics of command, the weight of responsibility, and the true meaning of leaving no one behind. The story concluded on a crisp autumn morning. Miranda, wearing Callahan's jacket, stood before a classroom of young, sharp-eyed intelligence officers. Among them was a determined young female lieutenant who looked at her with undisguised admiration. "Captain Reeves," the lieutenant asked, "after everything, after being erased for so long, how did you hold on to it all without becoming bitter?" Miranda paused, looking at the faces of the future leaders before her. "Because the mission was always more important than the recognition," she said, her voice quiet but strong. "And because you never forget the people you served with. You carry them with you. That honor, no one can ever take that away." She was no longer invisible. She was no longer a ghost. She was a guardian of memory, a mentor, a living testament to a history that had refused to stay buried. She had found her way out of the shadows and, in doing so, had created a new light for others to follow. This story teaches us that true honor is not always visible to the naked eye. It is carried silently in the hearts of those who have served. It's a powerful reminder to never judge a person by their appearance, because the quietest, most unassuming people often carry the greatest legacies. What does honor mean to you? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of hidden heroism and vindication inspired you, please like this video, subscribe for more powerful stories, and share it with someone who deserves to be seen. And comment "honor" to show your respect.